Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Corey Keefe. I'm president of the South Central Industrial Association. The SCIA is a multiple parish industrial organization representing more than 250 member companies with over 150,000 employees, many of which are engaged in servicing the oil and gas maritime operations in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico and around the world. The purpose of SCIA, a nonprofit organization, is primarily industrial firms, is to provide a vehicle for businessmen and women to address issues indicative to industry in the Bayou region. Recognizing the added strength in numbers, we work to create a stronger vote in the community and government. We are a parochial organization dedicated to improvement of industrial climate of our area and the energy-related industry. We are pleased to be part of LAGCOE and to present the first ever maritime sessions for this event. So I'm going to introduce to now the moderator for this event, and he's someone who's near and dear to our hearts and is involved in our day-to-day lives, and his name is Mr. Randall Luthi, and he is the president of the National Ocean Industry Association, better known as NOIA. An attorney and rancher from Freedom, Wyoming, Randall has an impressive background in governmental service and in the private sector. Randall most recently served as the director of the Minerals Management Services at the Department of the Interior from July of 2007 through January of 2009. There, Randall oversaw lease sales and collections and distributions to the states and federal government of mineral revenues and royalties. He also oversaw the expansion of renewable energy, of the Renewable Energy Office at the Minerals Management Services, which manages development of wind, wave, and current energy in the United States. Immediately before directing MMS, Randall served as the Deputy Director of Department's Fish and Wildlife Services. Luthi was also served as an attorney of both the Department of the Interior and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, better known as NOAA, where he worked on natural resources damaging following the Exxon Valdez accident. In 2000, Randall started the law firm of Luthi & Voiles, LLC in Thane, Wyoming, which helped pay for his working ranch, which consists of cows and calves, operations, and growing of hay and barley. So now Randall's career in Wyoming is, Randall's career in the Wyoming House of Representatives began in 1995, where he served as Speaker of the House from 2005 to 2006. So without further ado, I'll introduce him properly to y'all as Randall Luthi, the President of NOIA.
Corey, thank you all very much. And what a great idea for a panel, a maritime panel. The maritime industry is so important to the offshore world, and I'm pleased to say the maritime industry was part of the original group that helped form NOIA some 46 years ago. None of these individuals were involved, I want you to know, but some of their predecessor companies were. And Corey, if you don't mind, I'm just going to step out of the role for just a minute. And I think we need to give a thanks to Jane. Jane has helped put this panel together. Jane has run SCIA for since, I guess, just right out of high school, because I think you said 16 years or so. So I think that makes it right out of high school. And then in addition, SCIA became a part of NOIA as an allied group about 3 years ago. And I have certainly valued that partnership, that friendship, and that extra tool that we can use. And you and Corey have just made it a great opportunities. So why don't we give a round of applause to Jane. Yeah. She also paid me $5, so that was well worth it. So on the panel today, we are extremely fortunate to have three gentlemen, well, loosely gentlemen, that have a wide range of experience in the maritime industry. Immediately to my right is Robert Clemons, and he's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of SEACOR Marine Holdings. It's a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange and has operations in every major energy-producing region throughout the world. Robert has extensive experience in the offshore marine industry, both domestic and international. Next to him is Otto Candies III, and he's been Vice Chairman and Chief COO of Otto Candies LLC since 2014. Located in Des Allemands, I hope I got that right. Was it close? Not bad for an honorary Kunas. Okay, yeah. Louisiana, the company serves as offshore marine transportation specialist. And Otto has held management positions with the company and its affiliates, again, since right out of high school, evidently in '88. Furthest over is Ben Bordelon, and he's president and CEO of shareholder of Bollinger Shipyards, certainly a well-known company through not only Louisiana but throughout the Gulf industry and actually parts of the world as well. It's located in Lockport, Louisiana. He's been in management positions at Bollinger since 2000, and he says, those of you that know the Bollinger family know that Ben is one of them, and likewise has therefore been involved in professional local community organizations. So each panelist is going to tell you a little bit about their business and why the maritime industry is important. And why don't we just kick it off in the order that I introduced you. So, Robert? So you can sit there, or you can come up here. You can wander around, whatever you would like.
Yeah, wandering around. That, as Randall had mentioned, Robert Clemons, SEACOR Marine, been with the company since a merger, officially a merger of between SEACOR and Seabulk. I happened to be in Nigeria at the time, and my wife and I were basically just saying, well, the worst thing that can happen is we get to leave Nigeria, so this is not a bad thing. But we made the loop around to Louisiana. Our office in Houma, Louisiana, is now the headquarters for the newly spun off public traded company SEACOR Marine Holdings, which, as some of you probably know, used to be part of the SEACOR Holdings Group, where we had tankers, tugs, a very broad range of assets and services provided. Now we're basically what you would call a pure play company. Our direct peers are Otto Candies, the Hornbecks, the other boat companies of the world. But as Randall had mentioned, we're publicly traded. So, we do have a few issues that some of the private companies don't. The fundamentals of the business are basically the same, but we have a few more documents that we have to go through on a regular basis. Public filings, things like that. SEACOR has a broad range of assets, and I guess it follows our DNA. From the SEACOR Holdings Group, where we had tankers, tugs, produced alcohol for Sky Vodka, and quite a few other things that people probably don't even know about. But we always believed in diversity, not I guess a vertical integration with your core business, but diversifying. So if you have one component of your business that's down, the other component could be doing better. We still carry that same philosophy, or similar at least, even though we're now a pure play offshore marine service service company. We are one of the few companies in the world that has assets that cover really the full life cycle of a well offshore. And as Randall also mentioned, we have a footprint throughout the world. So overall, I would say the one primary spot, although offshore oil and gas throughout the world is critical to many different countries, economies, etc. Fouchon, Lafayette, the Gulf Coast here in Louisiana is critical not just for Louisiana, but really for the whole country. I mean, there's such a huge percentage of the oil that is utilized within our country and in our system that really comes from offshore, directly through Fouchon, through Lafayette, through New Iberia, and a few other places. So when people tell you that the offshore oil and gas industry is not a critical piece, we don't need to worry about highways, we don't need to worry about lease sales because we have all the onshore oil and gas, it's simply not true. So I guess I'll pass it over. Otto typically tells me that I talk too much, so he gave me a timer in my pocket. So.
Thanks, Robert. As mentioned, I'm Otto Candies III. My company is Otto Candies LLC. It is a privately held company owned by my family. This year, 2017, is actually our 75th anniversary of being in business. My grandfather started the company in 1942. We are not quite as diversified as far as that goes. We do have a bit of vertical diversity. We do own and operate our own shipyard. That's in Houma. And we own and operate various types of offshore vessels, primarily offshore supply vessels and what we call IMR, or inspection, maintenance, and repair. Some people might refer to them as MPSVs, which are multi-purpose support vessels. So we currently are operating in the U.S. Gulf, in Brazil, and in the Gulf of Mexico, in Mexico. You know, unfortunately, right now is a real tough time for our industry. You know, it's as I mentioned, this is our 75th year in business. Last year, in 2016, was the first time in the history of our company that we had to do layoffs. We've trimmed our workforce from approximately 600 to about 400. So we've cut a third of our workforce in the last 2 years. You know, I don't know that there's a whole lot of brightness in the immediate future, but I think you'll see some restructuring. I think you'll see some things change in our industry where the companies that are not overly leveraged, that are able to fight through this tough time, you know, very low rates, very low utilization. You'll find if you look at the, you know, the publicly traded companies like SEACOR and some of the others do have to publish their information on things like their utilization rates. You'll see most of those are at 50% or less utilization right now. There's billions of dollars worth of offshore assets that are tied up that are not working right now. So things that you noticed as recent lease sales, opening up more acreage, all those sort of things are things that are going to be very vital. You know, things like workforce development, tax levels, all those kind of things are going to be vital because we're really working on some very thin margins right now, and I think you're going to see more of that for a while yet to come. So, you know, for private companies such as ours that, you know, might not have quite the access to the public markets for capital and things like that, you have to be, you know, very conscious of your expenses, very conscious of the things you do. At the same time, our industry, as I'm sure most of you know, is quite demanding as far as safety regulation and safety requirements. So we really have to cut back without cutting corners, and that's sort of what we're looking at doing in the future. So, you know, I'm sure we'll open it up for some questions afterward, but hopefully you have some good ones, and then I'll pass it along to Ben, who's going to talk, can answer any questions about the shipyard side of the business.
Thanks, Ott. How you doing? Yeah? He's not doing that good. Golly, Ott. Come on, give us some good news, man. No, Ott's a longtime family friend, and he's talking about his family and business got started 75 years ago. My grandfather started my business in 1946, so they're a little bit older than us, not by much, but I'm third generation. My grandfather, to me, the old American success story. He was a machinist by trade, not college educated, working at another shipyard. Actually, the old man died where he was working, left my grandfather some money back in the early 40s, $10,000, and it was much more than my grandfather ever had before. Tried to buy the other people out, didn't work, so he bought some swamp land on Bayou Lafourche. They had an old World War II machine shop that was being auctioned off, and he bought a lathe and a drill press, and that's how he got started. That was the beginning of our business. Similar to Otto's story, his grandfather, trawler by trade. So, you know, good hard-working people, the greatest generation, and they left a stamp on us. And, you know, here we are fast forward until today's age. We roughly right now are right around 2,000 employees. We down probably about 600 people in this downturn. And I'll give some specifics of what we do, non-oil and gas, and about our business. But I do often think about our grandparents and the struggles they've lived through, and this is one of those struggles that we're going to remember. I remember after Hurricane Katrina, I told my mom and my Uncle Boise, I said, man, the best thing about this storm, most people think what the hell's good about Katrina, is that I don't have to hear about Hurricane Betsy anymore. You know, my whole life I heard about how bad Betsy was. Well, Katrina was worse. I lived through it, so now that's a new barometer, and now we've had some more recent storms that are as bad. But this down market's going to be one of those. Hopefully in 20 years, and I'm looking back, fussing my kids, and they running the business, I'm going to say I remember when I lived through this downturn. And like Otto said, we have some challenges ahead of us from the oil and gas side. You are going to see consolidations happen. Some of my biggest concerns right now from my business is credit risk. You know, companies that I've given credit to over the years, it's hard. It's hard to tell a customer you've been doing business with for 40 years, you got no credit, I need some money. And that's some of the things that are happening because, frankly, a lot of people have gotten burned, and I don't think it's the end of that. You're going to have some reckoning happen soon in the oil and gas side of it. Offshore. And the land side, you know, I know it's moving in the right direction, which is exciting. And we do have I have some other businesses that are doing well on that side. But, you know, Bollinger is just to give you an idea of who we are. Right now, I tell my banks I'm a government contractor. I'm not an oil and gas guy. We have a big portion of our business, thank God. We do a lot of work for the government. We have a government contract right now with the Coast Guard. We've done work for all segments of the armed services. We're working on some other programs right now. But we do have a backlog at our Lockport facility where we employ about 800 people. And we have backlog there pretty much through 2027. So that helps give us some stability, gives us some runway to make it through this thing. The other facilities, so that we have the government contracting piece that's a part of our business, the three-legged stool I like to call it. That's the strongest leg right now for sure. I have a repair and conversion business where we dry dock Otto and SEACOR's vessels and a lot of other people where we do their maintenance and major conversions. We have 10 different shipyards in total. So that's another leg. And then we have the commercial new build side. And obviously that's the one that's really been impacted. Nobody's wanting to build supply boats or IMR boats or crew boats, anything else like that. So that's definitely been impacted. But we're fortunate we do a lot of other work in other industries. We do a lot of municipality work, dredge market work, the offshore tank barge market. So we have some other projects that are going on now. But even those have slowed. That market's become somewhat saturated. We do it to ourselves time and time again. We've got a great market. We're going to overbuild it. And pretty soon everybody's getting tied up and banks are freaking out. And that's really what's happened around the world. And that's a big difference. And Robert could speak more to that. But we're in a worldwide glut right now on the offshore side, and that goes from not only vessels but drilling rigs and everything else associated with that. So we've seen a big investment happen over the years, trillions of dollars being invested around the world, and now you have a major slowdown happening. While shipyard in La Rose, if any of you head down towards Fouchon, I don't want to say encourage you to go look, but you can see it from the road. We pretty much idled the yard. We got about 20 guys working there, but we have 104 pieces of equipment stacked in that one yard. And I'm talking 300-foot supply boats, 250-foot supply boats, deck barges, all kind of different things. We call it the boneyard, unfortunately. But it's a depressing sight, but it's a reflection of the market that we're living in today. And, you know, what we're trying to do to manage through it, some of the things these guys said, you got to manage through cost and clean up certain areas in your business that, you know, frankly, you become kind of sloppy in how you run over the boom years. And some of this stuff, I think, is healthy in the sense of cleaning that up. And I think going forward, it's going to create a better cost structure for us going forward. But I am a believer that this current cost structure in the market right now is not sustainable. Some of the rates that are being delivered to our customers, the oil and gas companies, it's not sustainable. You have rates that are below cost. They're not covering crew costs, some of these rates, and really people are stabbing each other in the back, and at some point that's going to give. So I'm not sure when that is, but it's going to happen. My outlook going forward, I still think next year is going to be rough as can be. I'm not one that predicts, you know, the exact date and time of when it's going to happen, but I'm preparing for this thing to be bad for a couple of more years, and that's the position that I'm putting our company in. You know, foreseeing that we're going to be in a tough market for a couple of more years. There'll be some opportunities with that. As Otto said, there'll be consolidations not only on vessel side, but I think in all segments of the business, shipyards included. What's happening in the shipyard business right now too, there's not a lot of jobs. So the same thing happens on the boats. Everybody starts cutting their price because they're desperate. They see the cliff coming, and that's a dangerous game in a shipyard. You can get caught. That's a dangerous game for the shipyard owner and the vessel owner, because the last thing you want is a facility where you got a 3/4 built vessel and the yard's broke and you're tied up in bankruptcy. And that has happened, and it's happening now. So it's all things we're aware of. I like to go in with my eyes wide open. You know, my grandpa was one of those guys. He'd pull me aside, he'd say, hey, son, if you have any problems, solve them. And you know, it's a funny, simple statement, but you can't be looking for somebody to put their arm around you every time and get you through it. You got to figure out a way to manage through this business. And times like this present opportunities, and I'm looking forward to seeing this thing turn. So with that, Mr. Randall.
Well, thank you, Ben. Now just open an opportunity for questions, but I just want to kick it off, and I want to follow up with Ben's last remarks in the last 5 or so minutes. But panel members, other than Ben, assuming nothing happens for 2, 3, 4 years in terms of a significant price and increase in oil, what are you going to do? How is that going to affect your industry? How are you looking at what is your outlook, and what are some of the things you're doing just to survive?
Can y'all hear us okay? Anybody?
Good thing you're not in mic production.
Okay, how's that? Okay. Well, I think, as Ben said, we're kind of working under the assumption that it is going to be a couple of years before things get much better. The low-hanging fruit's pretty much already been done. You know, that first round of cuts you make in people or in things are normally things you probably should have done anyway. The second round's a little tougher. The third round, now you're releasing people that are good people that you'd like to keep. You're not reinvesting in your assets. So, you know, what you really have to do is, I think pretty much across the industry, the wages to the mariners have been cut, the benefits have been cut, the guys are working less time. In our industry, they tend to get paid a daily wage for when they work, not necessarily a set salary. So you've not only lowered the daily wage, you've lessened the amount of days that your people are working every year. You've done the best you can to in our case, refinance some of our loans at a lower interest rate. We've met with our insurers to, you know, maybe take a little more risk away from them and lower premium. You know, your overhead is cut to the bone. So the unfortunate part of all of it is that our customers are looking ahead to see that maybe these are the new rates that they want going forward. But as Ben said, you can only do these things for a certain period of time. If you're asked to continue to do these, there's nothing left to reinvest or to maintain or to do the things you need to do to keep a business going long term. So we have a combination of things: tighten the belt as tight as you can get it, work really hard to do that, but also to survive and hope that along with your customers you can get to some realistic rate structure where you can not only perform the services you have to do, but reinvest in your business. Our industry is quite capital intensive, although we do have a lot of really good people. You know, you might have, in our case, you might have a, you know, $100 million vessel that has 12 people on it. So you do have to invest a lot of money to employ the people that you employ. So, you know, it's going to be very vital to, you know, keep your capital structure in some sort of a reasonable place. Keep your overhead as low as possible, and your operating costs have to be trimmed as tight as they can going forward, and hope you can hang in there long enough to make it to when it turns around. So.
And I guess following Otto, to answer the question, and I guess touching on a couple of Ben's points, I had a small meeting in my office about a year ago, and I can remember telling some of the young folks there that you simply don't learn how to operate this business during the good times. You really take your eye off the ball. You're thinking about a hunting ranch. You talk yourself into buying a hunting ranch, and you wind up being the one using it, or a suite at the football stadium, and you can't get your customers to go because there's not enough time. Those are some undisciplined investment decisions. And if money's flowing and you think it's never going to stop, and the world is awash with capital, and it's cheap, and anybody with a good business plan can come in and basically talk the bank into giving them more and more, your balance sheet might look okay, but your business long term is going to suffer because you're simply not minding the till. And I think during these times, both these guys have a couple of the things that they're doing right now in terms of tightening the belt, watching every dime that's going out the door. It's the same for us. I think it's the same for any company that's going to survive a downturn like this. And it's really a business fundamental. It sounds simple, almost to the point of stupidity, but you just can't spend more money than you have. So renegotiating leases, laying up vessels rather than operating at that cash flow break-even point. There's a lot of things that companies are doing today to just to survive, ourselves included. We're no different. We've had significant layoffs, just like everyone else in the industry. Some of them quite painful. In fact, to Otto's point, some of the last round of layoffs were friends. People I'd really grown close to and that were solid, capable as the day is long, good boat hands, good office staff. They do their job. They show up every day, but you just can't spend more than you bring in. To the bigger picture for the industry, I guess, it's worth noting that if this lasts until roughly 2022, I think to Randall's time frame, the industry will be different at the end of that period. It won't look then like it looks today even. There will be very significant consolidation within the industry because there will just be no other real way to survive. I think you'll see some family companies possibly joining hands. You'll see effectively a single office or a single staff accumulating fleets over time, something that we have at SEACOR have had a history of doing, but it doesn't really matter. It still has everyone scared on pins and needles, walking on eggshells around the office because they worry if their day is coming and they're going to be without a job and in an industry where they don't have a job waiting on them on the back end. With all that said, I'm not as negative about the industry as my colleagues here. I do think because of the importance of offshore oil and gas and because of some of the technical and pricing difficulties within onshore, that offshore is going to be the long-term solution to product demand. And it may not turn next year, but I do see some signs. I would say at the moment we're doing what I call bumping along the bottom. Or we have been bumping along the bottom until 6 or 8 weeks ago, and I think now we might be hovering over the bottom. 2018 is going to be tough. In fact, 2018 through possibly 20 are going to be tough years, but people will start to be able to earn money. Their balance sheets will start to be right-sized, and so that to me means a healthier industry in the years to come.
Might just follow up, and then I will shut up and let all of you ask questions. But let me reverse the order and start with Robert. Internationally, that seems to be helping some companies. So it's a two-part question. One, what kind of policies are those countries offering that makes it possible for you to be making money there as something to guide me as we talk to the United States? And then as all of you go down their own, or do you all have that possibility of going international?
I think certainly every one of the companies here has not only the possibility, but they've had experience operating internationally. For us, the footprint, being in the boat business, I guess it's worth saying the markets move and our assets move with the markets. So having a footprint in place, we see as an important ability to move with those markets. There are impediments in every individual country. People call West Africa the Old West. Mexico, they say the grounds are full of gringos that thought they could go to Mexico and make a lot of money, and they just weren't able to. Brazil is an extraordinarily difficult place to earn a living. The Middle East is stable for now, but I think everyone has worries or concerns long term about how stable it's going to remain. Southeast Asia has an enormous amount of supply, particularly in our sector of the industry, that have come out of the shipyards in China. So the North Sea, extremely cyclical market. So every market has its difficulties, its problems. But to answer Randall's question from my perspective, I think you do have some incentive to operate in certain places. I would say probably today the Middle East and Mexico are two of the better markets for SEACOR. We have local companies there, joint venture partners, and we've developed a DNA of doing business with someone locally. I guess our mantra is local knowledge is critical to our business. In Mexico, we're a minority partner, but we have 17 vessels, high-spec vessels operating in Mexico at a time when a lot of international oil companies, for the first time, are able to invest and explore for oil and gas. And so their Pemex is relatively stable, but with this reshuffle and the entry of additional players, whom are primarily American companies and with which we already have relationships, puts us in a very good position in Mexico. The Middle East, similar. Very difficult place to break into Saudi Arabia because of the Aramco contracting structure. But once you do, you're I don't want to say you're set. You're not set anywhere. You still have to produce and perform. But the reality is you're going to get a first call because you have gone through the you've jumped all the myriad of hurdles that you have to go through in order to become a prime contractor. Southeast Asia, I think, is going to take many, many years to return. Most countries have very strict local content regulations, and it's not just the local content or production of local jobs, et cetera. It goes all the way up to the ownership level that most people they're not going to give away their business. The North Sea is an easy place to operate. Very, very limited. There's very strict regulations in the North Sea in every jurisdiction there. And the taxes are high, and it's unionized and a lot of other things. But it's also a very easy place to get in, get out of, and not that high of hurdles to enter into the marketplace. As long as you play by the rules that everyone else plays by, then you're fine. The U.S., though, I think it's worth noting that in the U.S., people complain about the Jones Act regularly. I hear every week that there's a new story in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal that the Jones Act it's killing everybody. It's raising our prices through the roof. The reality is, and these guys know very well, every jurisdiction that we operate in throughout the world has its own form of Jones Act. And we have to comply with it there, just like anybody else who wants to come to the United States has to comply. And the reason it's such a prevalent concept is because every, particularly seafaring nation, understands the importance of a cabotage regulation to support their shipyard building, to support industry, and to support the governments of those locations, and particularly in a time of war.
Just speaking from the shipyard side, we don't have any international shipyards. Currently, we've done JVs with different facilities over the years. We've worked with different shipyards. We've built foreign military sale vessels. That's some things that we're working on now too. So we see that foreign market as an opportunity. But I think from my side, you know, Robert touched on it. The Jones Act specifically right now with Puerto Rico has been, to me, getting crucified, saying how they can't get goods and services to Puerto Rico because of the Jones Act. That's simply just not true. You know, I don't want to quote Trump, but fake news is fake news, and that's a bunch of crap. I mean, it's something we get frustrated with as an industry. And Robert's dead on talking about cabotage laws all around the world. They have them in other areas, and here we are trying to get rid of a law here that ensures our national defense, ensures domestic shipbuilding, ensures our jobs, ensures that we have good mariners that can operate in our vessels. And I know this from when I was a kid. We've always heard it. The Jones Act goes away, so do shipyards, period. We'll be out. And the first thing I'll do, I'll be clear and tell you that too, I will be owning a foreign shipyard. I'll take my toys and designs and go to China and start building Coast Guard boats. And that's, to me, ridiculous to think about that. And to have vessels operating in our inland waterways that have God knows who on them, or to have Indonesian airlines flying over the skies of America is crazy to me. But that to me is one of our biggest threats. And it's interesting because we seem to get more pushback from the Republicans. I'm a big Republican. I support Republicans. That seems to be the crux that we have sometimes with some people, that they don't understand it. They think about it as a protectionism law, and it's not. We want fair play. We want fair trade. But for me to operate under the guidelines that we do here in America, under Coast Guard regulations, OSHA, EPA, DEQ, everything else that we do, pay taxes. That's kind of a unique situation. We actually have to pay taxes. To me, it's an easy one, and it's something that we're always going to continue to push. So it's a big deal for us.
Pretty well covered.
All right. Questions from the audience? Corey.
Well, how about them Saints, man?
Something good.
My LSU.
Yeah, the baby. Recently, at the last NOIA convention, there was a gentleman who represented, I guess, basically the NOIA of Mexico. And he put this demonstration up on the board that was explanatory of the reform that they'd like to see happen in NAFTA. And they have an idea about including a cabotage element in there. And I guess what I want to know is what they'll think about that. Because let's face it, they have an issue down there where they don't have enough equipment to service the market. And it's been made clear to us by several operators that there's going to be a more robust drilling program in Mexico than there will be in the U.S. And so I know that we had that point now where we all know that something needs to happen with NAFTA. We're getting the short end of the stick on that. And I guess my question is how y'all feel about that?
You know, I guess what I would say is that, you know, kind of our industry position. In fact, all three of us serve on the board of directors of our trade organization called AMSA, the Offshore Marine Service Association. And, you know, AMSA's position, I think, to be, you know, philosophically true has always been that the reason that you need the Jones Act is every place in the world has these types of cabotage laws. So Mexico has them. If they may be talking about maybe that presentation about adding, but there's all kind of hoops you have to go through to operate in Mexico, just like everywhere else. If every place in the world would say, look, we're going to all lift cabotage laws and not have any anywhere, and anybody can operate like you want, once again, I think it would drive business away from the United States, because some places don't have the safety requirements, the construction requirements, the maintenance requirements that we have. Just like what we've always said here is, so long as everybody operating in any particular theater has to follow the same rules, we're prepared to compete with anybody anywhere in the world. I think we have as good or better equipment as anywhere in the world. We definitely have the best mariners in the world. So, you know, in and of itself, introducing a cabotage law is really nothing that we're not used to already. So long as we make sure that we keep ours intact in our own backyard, we're more than happy to compete anywhere in the world with any companies from any part of the world. So, you know, I don't see it as a big issue because, you know, quite frankly, I think it's already the case pretty much everywhere in the world, and we're used to operating that way. We just need to make sure in our own backyard that we do the same thing and enforce fairness is really what we're talking about.
Corey, I guess if you're probably referring to, you know, there has been some discussion about relaxing under NAFTA, relaxing the cabotage laws of both countries so a Mexican flag vessel can operate in the U.S. and vice versa. I would say as a company that has jumped through those hoops, as Otto has said, I probably wouldn't be very supportive. But the reality is, I'd say until probably 3 to 5 years ago sort of range, there was as many U.S. flag vessels operating in Mexico as there were Mexican flag. But a huge amount of investment that has gone into the industry for Mexican flagged assets with money that's invested. I think the shareholders of those companies that own the Mexican cabotage assets I can't imagine that they would lay down easily and allow something like that. Just like in the United States, I think as a public company particularly, there's no way that I could ever advocate erosion of the Jones Act because the financial backing in my company is effectively relying on the cabotage laws of the U.S. to protect their investment. So I think it'd be a very tough sell, even if NAFTA was a smooth, efficient running policy between the U.S. and Mexico. I think that would be a tough sell.
Any other questions? Yes, Bill. That's you, yeah.
There's been China, you mentioned that, the whole world's competing with China, and in Southeast Asia, like you were saying, Robert, what's the future of China in the offshore work? I mean, are they going to run out of money from the banks to start building equipment, and can they involve the shipyards, lack of work there as well? So, you know.
Asking about China, you know, I might get away from the Jones Act for a second, but the Chinese shipbuilding market obviously has been, in the last 15 years, I would say, 20 years, major investments. And that's a good example of, you know, state-funded shipyards that are popping up all over the place, big money thrown at them, high numbers of people, not really that efficient. Some of the quality issues, and these guys can talk more specifically, Robert. We've had quality issues come out of China. We've seen vessels, foreign flag vessels that's come here, Bill, that has had problems. There's no question as far as that goes. And I think it's only going to be magnified now. You've even had banking arrangements that are being challenged if it's a Chinese-built vessel. We've seen that happen in markets because they are a lot cheaper. There's no doubt. When you work in cheap labor, as everybody knows, you can sell something for a lot less. We get it. But we also see it even on the supply side. I know there's suppliers here. You know, some of the shackles we buy and slings and lifting equipment, it's some inferior products. There's no doubt about it. And us as a company, we don't use them, period. We've gotten rid of all of that. But I think that's only going to be challenged more. You know, the buzzword now, Bill, is the foreign steel. You know, one thing as a government contract that I am seeing more is the Buy American clause that's being put in contracts. And that's good, and I'm going to tell you it's good and it's bad. It's challenging sometimes in the sense of our government comes up with a requirement, and we have to meet a certain requirement, and there's not enough U.S. manufacturers for some equipment that's not capable. I'm not talking about China now. I'm talking about more Germany and those type of countries. So that becomes a little bit challenging. I do see a transformation and a migration more towards the Buy American clauses with this administration, and really not just this administration. It's been moving that way anyway. It's just a little more enforced now. But I think China is going to be the last on the list as far as acceptable products, at least for here. And I think with the constraint and the strain that's across the industry worldwide, China might not be as the shining star for value. You're going to have other nations around the world that are going to be competitive in supplying infrastructure and projects. So the collapse of it, that could be scary too. I mean, that's a whole different discussion. There's a lot of products that come here from China that I may not put on my vessels, but my wife buys a lot of stuff, and my kids and everybody else. So that'll be interesting to see.
Thank you, Ben.
Sure.
The LNG market, liquefied natural gas market. I think Delphi is talking about building some vessels to load ships located off the coast of Cameron. Do y'all even look at building those or getting into that?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, he's asking about the LNG market. There's definitely been a major push. I mean, it's been kind of, I call it noise over the last 10 years, but you're actually starting to see some projects starting to happen now. You're starting to see some bunkering type barges being built. You're starting to see facilities. People are talking about LNG ships, and I'm saying that kind of lightly. It's not the typical 1,200-foot ships. These are more, it's a smaller version, so where you can get into certain ports around the, you know, they're talking about a facility here in Fouchon. They're talking about some off of Corpus now in different areas. Florida's been heating up. The cruise industry seems to be definitely moving towards that. That's well advertised and talked about. Well, if that's the case, you got cruise ships coming in and out of a lot of ports. Somebody's going to have to bunker them. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. And you've seen the facilities and the investments happen around the areas. You know, it's amazing to me that right now, we talk about Port Fouchon is talking about having an LNG facility. That's pretty amazing to me to have that. And that's a big deal from, number one, a resident of Lafourche Parish, but two, a transformation in an industry that we actually, it's happening. It's happened a lot quicker in other areas around the world, mainly because you've had commitments of government to put the infrastructure in place. The U.S. seems to be a little more behind the curve as far as helping that develop, which puts the pressure back on private business, which creates opportunity for some. But some people are having to kind of stick their neck out a little early, and I think the returns will start happening, but I think that's going to be more and more. And as that technology gets more proven and people actually trust it, I think it's going to be definitely an expandable market.
Just from a vessel owner's perspective, looking more, say, for example, of a LNG-powered vessel, in the types of vessels we have, it's still relatively expensive to do that as opposed to a normal diesel-powered vessel. Most of the ones you see that have been built are dual-powered. They'll have LNG, but they'll also have diesel as well. In the current market environment, I don't think anybody's really looking into putting LNG in simply because there's nobody investing really in anything right now. When things do turn around, which I think they will, as Robert said, although I maybe sounded pessimistic, you know, my family's been in this industry for 75 years, and I hope that my son can do the same. And we're trying to set up our business so, in fact, that he can. But I do think that it's going to take a little while before you see it take off. And the industry is going to have to get a little bit more robust to justify the investment it takes to do the LNG power for our types of things. So if, you know, there have been a few built in the industry, and they've typically been, I guess, for lack of a better term, subsidized by the customer to be able to do that. But if you just came to me today and say, okay, you need to build a boat to do this, LNG would not be something that we would do because it just wouldn't be efficient from a capital perspective. So.
I think they covered it.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I've got one for whoever wants to handle this, but I heard talk about how many boats or how many pieces of equipment you have stacked. We talk about utilization rates. So we see the rig industry, the utilization rate down. We see them scrapping iron, big rigs. How are you guys handling the scrapping process of your boats as they age? Because as we reduce the number of fleet for both the rigs we could see the industry make a comeback, I guess. What do you think?
Well, I'd say first, our industry has probably been the world's worst about attrition, about actually scrapping boats. There's been a lot of talk lately about scrapping assets, just like there was in the 80s, but nobody really wants to be the first. I mean, I guess there has been a couple. We have put under contract 2, so we're about to scrap 2 of our older assets, and we've done it in a relatively straightforward way with a scrap yard that's capable of processing and chunking and selling, and if there's anything left in the end, then we'll basically split the proceeds, sort of a thing. I think just like the rig industry, I think our industry requires consolidation and scrapping. But I think it is also worth noting that not only the old boats, but new alike in today's world, if they sit for 2, 3, 5 years, the old boats are just, nobody's going to have the money, or there's not going to be enough activity at one time to justify people bringing out the old equipment first. So a lot of that equipment will be deemed scrapped. It may sit there for the next 20 years, wherever it is, collecting dust, and at some point in the life of that vessel, it just becomes uneconomical to bring it out, bring it back into service. Some of the newer boats that are highly electronic, very high-tech assets, they're going to require a lot larger reactivation cost than most owners are going to think. Because these components and the equipment that's installed on these boats is just, quite frankly, very finicky to the weather, particularly here in the South. And so even though the cost is higher, though, they could be reactivated because they have a higher potential return. So, but it's going to take a little while. I mean, a lot of these boats that are scrapped, I think it's going to take a while before you see a lot of reactivations, I am hoping that a lot of the other vessel owners in the industry will also scrap assets just like we are.
One quick add to that. As Robert said, our industry's been historically quite adverse to scrapping. And one of the things I think we'll need going forward is a change in the attitude of, unfortunately in our industry, the scrapping really doesn't bring you back a lot of value immediately. In other words, you don't have a lot of salvageable value when you scrap it. What our industry, as well as I think in particular the lenders, because I do think they have these vessels, these assets as collateral against a lot of loans, you're going to need to understand the fact that the true value in scrapping is not in what you get back in the scrap, but it's in bringing some supply-demand balance back, and then your other assets become more valuable. So until the industry and its lenders look at it that way, as opposed to saying, you mean I built a boat 20 years ago for $20 million and I'm going to get $100,000 back when I scrap it, but the other ones you have now become more valuable because you have a more supply-demand balance in your market. We're going to need some help from the lenders in the industry to understand that and allow people to scrap. As Robert said, you got a couple here and there, but you're going to have a really systematic scrapping throughout the industry to have an impact on that supply-demand imbalance.
Because of the capital-intense market that y'all are in, would y'all consider master limited partnerships in the future to survive or sustain?
I guess at this point you look at pretty much anything you think, any sort of capital structure you think might bring some efficiency to your operation, you take a look at it. There were a lot of partnerships back in the 80s, and in fact, I think in the long term it had a negative impact because it let a lot of people that weren't really boat people come into the industry. They didn't understand the ups and downs. They didn't understand the ins and outs of the industry, and it just poured too much capital and too much money in, and that tends to be what happens in our industry, that things get really good. Both the companies as well as their lenders get a little bit overly optimistic and put too much capital, and then when things turn down, you see the effect we're having now.
That's a good point. It happened in the compression business.
Sure.
And one other comment, I was talking about banks, and everybody's trying to work with their bank. So everybody's got assets that, they're working literally below cost right now. So you go to your bank, you try to renegotiate, pay an interest and principal, then you renegotiate, we're going to reduce the principal, then we're going to eliminate the principal, we're just going to go to interest for a little while, you're going to have a holiday, and all of this, I understand it, trust me, but all that keeps doing is keep too many boats in the market. So some of this is going to work itself out at some point. We've talked about this a lot, but that collateral issue is big, because who wants to go over there and say I have a $50 million loan and I have these 3 boats that are my collateral, and all of a sudden I'm scrapping 2 of them because they hadn't worked in 4 years, and they're like, well, where's my $50 million in collateral? So that's some of the challenges that are happening in this market. But it absolutely, you have to have some scrapping. We're terrible at it. I'm in the repair business, so I like the old boats. I'll be the first to tell you that. We've been making a lot of money on old boats for a long time. I like it. However, there's some still 40-year-old, 50-year-old boats that are chugging around there, and they're competing against boats that were built, 10, 12 years ago, and that 10-year-old boat they demanding the same rate as that 40-year-old boat, and it's a crazy market. The whole value, what are we getting here? It's a DP2 vessel, it's a DP1. Right now, it's cost. Who can go the cheapest? And it's an interesting market too, because all the relationships and everything you've built over the years and whatnot, it almost comes out the window. Tell my sales group it's the hardest time to be a salesman, because you're getting in front of people and they don't have work, and if they have it, how you get it? Be the cheapest and the fastest. That's it. And I hope they have money. Hope they pay us.
Last question, Ben. What the current market for vessels is it 300 footers, 240s? What are you seeing out there? Vessel size.
I guess, Bill, you're referring to which classes you see the most demand long term?
I think offshore deepwater, I guess.
Well, since I don't have 300 footers, that's not the one. I think to answer the question and give you just a very tiny history, which you probably already well aware of, is that most recently almost every boat that's been built in the last 5 years has been a 270 foot or above. These are big boats. They're very capable. They're high technology, high capacity. They can carry these huge loads. I think probably an overlooked sector, or at least in my personal view, an overlooked sector has been that mid-size from, let's say, 200 foot to 240 foot class vessel. I think that's probably going to be one of the first boats that makes a little bit of a comeback because most of the fleet is old, and those that have the newer assets that are higher technology that can get into more shallow water ports in Mexico and West Africa, they seem to be somewhat gainfully employed compared to the rest of the fleet, the worldwide fleet. 200 to 240 range. And not only I'm not only referring to the United States when I say that the big boats are all that's been built. It's worth saying, and going back to the earlier comment on shipyards in China, you could have picked the top 4 shipyards in China, and within 2 years they could have completely rebuilt the entire worldwide supply of boats. They became that efficient. They had that much money, that many panel lines. That they had and have capacity that most people just can't get their heads around. And I guess on top of that, there was up to 1,400 shipyards in China at one time. Most of them have gone away. The government has effectively, I don't want to say seized control. They were already in control, but they have picked a handful of shipyards that are going to survive, is probably the best way to say it. But almost all of the boats that have come out of China in that same 5-year period have also been these big, huge, high-tech boats. And I can give you a personal example to what Ben was saying earlier. We bought one. We completed it. I guess we had about 6 months to go before completion, so we could SEACORize the boat. Every company has they build their they have their own things that they prefer, they like, that are built through experience. And no matter how many inspectors you send through a boat, it's going to have a few issues. It's machinery. So we get the boat, we put it on contract, and it winds up that a small Chinese-made filament in a light fixture above the engine caused enough of a spark to basically turn the engine room into an inferno. And almost $3 million later, not to mention Ben's shipyard pricing, but you know, yeah, Ben did get that repair work and did a fine job, but it's a gremlin in the system that you just don't, when you go to a shipyard in China, that you're running a risk. And you don't feel like you have that risk when you build at a quality shipyard in the U.S. or certainly some of those in Europe. Who are you going to go back to? The Chinese government, the manufacturer of the Chinese filament? I mean, there is an insurance claim, but it's under our policy, so it's going to cost us in the long run anyway. So, right.
All right. Well, thank you all for your attendance for this session. And Jane, congratulations on what I think was a very informative panel. And hopefully this is the beginning of having such a panel at future LAGCOE events. On a personal note, I certainly appreciate the professionalism and the ability and my relationship with the three gentlemen here. They've been a great asset to SCIA, AMSA, and particular NOIA, and to the industry as a whole. Please, let's give them a nice round of applause.
Here at LAGCOE, we want to thank you guys for coming to. It was a great presentation. I was very impressed. I learned a lot. We have a small token for you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. All three for me?
Yep, all three for you.
Oh,
one
my
for
gosh.
you, too.
Oh, thank
I was
you.
thinking you
We're
had one
doing
earlier,
nothing.
but you got a different one.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.